we have a new president-elect. Where's GAO fit in with the transition effort going on right now?
Sure. Well, first, hello, Frank. Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Good morning, everyone here. It's a pleasure to be here today. I have to apologize in advance. I'm Italian, so this mic will move away from my mouth from time to time. Under the Presidential Transition Act, GAO has a special responsibility. We're referred to as a resource that incoming administrations are encouraged to talk to find out about their management challenges, risk, and responsibilities. So we take that responsibility very seriously, and we don't wait until people come to us. The day after the election, I sent a letter to President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence, unveiling a new special app that we had created that would give access to all of GAO's suggestions. And the app and our full website on the transition effort were created specifically to help the incoming administration and the incoming Congress to understand the issues across the government. It's organized in several categories. First is a category on priority recommendations that GAO has for them. What we do, as you know, Frank, about 80% of our recommendations are adopted over time, but at any one point in time we have 5,000 to 6,000 open recommendations. Right. And rather than hit everybody with that, we say, here are the priority ones for for every department and agency in the federal government. We also list in another section all the key issues that we believe need to be addressed for every department and agency in the federal government, including our high-risk list, which we update on a regular basis. That includes 32 areas across the federal government. And then we've also included in this year's material a management agenda for them to consider that would be a government-wide management agenda with a number of areas on it, such as managing the finances of the federal government, cybersecurity issues, et cetera. This app is available at Apple or Google Plays. It's free, and it's available to the public as well.
How many new people come in from a transition? It's the thousands, right?
There'll be 4,000 appointees in that process. And the transition, really, Frank, is in several phases. As you know, I've been around for a long time and through a lot of different transitions. The first phase really is now between the election and the inauguration. But then a lot of those people in the transition teams don't really stay in the administration. They'll leave. They're there to prepare and to develop proposals and policy and management agendas for each administration. And then the new team will be put in place. And that'll take place probably over the course of the year. By the time you get the cabinet secretaries, other heads of departments and agencies, the full management team in place with the deputies, the undersecretaries, et cetera. Now, what I also do at GAO is, as soon as anybody's confirmed, I meet with them to talk about our suggestions for their department and agencies, make sure we have a constructive, open relationship. Even though we're independent auditors in the legislative branch, we want to make sure that we're engaging them because we want them to make improvements in government operations and things. So it's a big priority for us, and I do it all the time, because there's a lot of different, the average tenure is still only about 2 years for political appointees. So there's actually some elements. This is a big transition because so many people are leaving at once and so many people coming in, but this happens throughout the tenure of any administration.
I also found it interesting that you guys don't really directly get affected as much by the transition with incoming and outgoing personnel. You only have one appointed position at GAO, right? And
Right.
It's yours.
Yes.
How long is your term?
That's correct. I have a 15-year term. The Comptroller General is appointed through a process where there's a bicameral, a bipartisan congressional commission of 10 members. And they recommend 3 or more names to the President. The President picks from the list. You're confirmed by the Senate, but it's for a 15-year term. And while I've been acting Comptroller General since 2008, I was confirmed in 2010, around this time actually. And so the rest of my term goes to December 22nd, 2025. So I'm
GAO
planning
is the
on,
steady ship.
yes,
And
yes.
you're going to be here a while.
All right.
All right. You already touched on the high-risk list, but that's
Yes.
perhaps the most important work that you guys do. Every 2 years, you come out with a list of the highest risk investments, projects, programs in government. The last one that came out almost 2 years ago now included IT acquisition for the first time and also VA healthcare issues. Those are 2 new additions. So what can we, I guess, a very broad question, but maybe you can get as narrow as you want. How has the government responded overall in addressing particularly the IT acquisition issue? And then what can we expect in dealing with those risk areas in the future?
Yeah, first, we update the high-risk list every 2 years with the beginning of each new Congress. And so that also coincides with new administrations when there is a change in the administration. So we'll be updating the list. It'll probably be available in February 2017.
And you'll be called up to talk to all the
Yes.
Congress about it.
Yeah. Typically, we do a press conference with the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee and the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. It's usually both bicameral, bipartisan press release, and then usually there's a hearing or two following directly on that. So it gets a lot of visibility. Last time we updated, Frank, as you mentioned, 2015, we introduced a new element where we rate each of the high-risk areas on what are the criteria to get off. You know, it's sort of an urban legend. If you get on the GAO high-risk list, you can never get off. But that's not true. About a third of the areas over time we've taken off. But there's 5 criteria. You have to have sustained leadership. You have to have the capacity, the resources, and the people. You have to have a good corrective action plan that addresses the root causes of the problem. You have to have a monitoring effort to monitor your progress with interim milestones. And then 5th, and the most difficult, is you actually have to demonstrate some progress of reducing the risk or making, positive changes so that we're comfortable that you're on the path to full recovery. You don't require 0 risk. That's not possible. And we don't require, completely solving all these problems to come off the list. Now, when we take something off the list, it doesn't mean it's out of sight, so we keep an eye on it over time. Now, with regard to the IT area, we designated IT acquisitions and operations across the entire federal government as high risk. This is an area we've been watching for many years. We had individual IT projects on it before, but there were so many failures and underperformance of IT operations, we felt it was time to do this. One of the reasons we did was at that time we only had, of 800 recommendations we made, only 23% had been implemented, which is far less than what we normally have. There's been good progress. It's about 46% have been implemented now.
Since the high risk?
Since the high risk
So
designation.
that's almost doubling the
Yes.
effectiveness of those recommendations that you make.
Yes. I'm very pleased with the commitment. One of the things that I've done with this administration and prior administrations is we have meetings between the Executive Office of the President, usually it's a Deputy Director for OMB, for management, and the agencies on the high-risk list, either the agency head or the deputy, and we go through and have meetings in the 2-year period to say specifically what needs to be done. We got briefed recently on this area, the IT acquisitions area, and a number of policies have been set out in place. FTARA is for those of you that don't, Information Technology Reform Act, is very important for it to be effectively implemented to address the high-risk areas. So Congress has been very engaged. I think Congressman Hurd and Meadows, Connolly, and Kelly deserve a lot of credit for aggressive oversight, which has spurred on additional action. So I think you'll see in this next update some good progress in that area.
It really does seem to be a bipartisan effort, that one issue, or at least one of the few issues, as we've alluded to previously, but before you got here, a lot of the folks sort of belabored that point. I also wanted to ask, too, you guys do a sort of ROI every year, is it? Or
Yes.
is it every
Every
few-
year. Every year.
So So explain that for the audience too, just on those recommendations that you make actually do have a direct impact on dollars, right?
Yes, absolutely, Frank. Yes, we gauge our performance based upon several things, but one of the most important areas is how have we actually improved government? Have we saved money? Have we improved agency operations? You know, we don't measure our performance by just how many reports we issue. That we don't at all. We measure by how many of our recommendations get implemented. Last year, as a result of our recommendations being implemented, there was financial benefits of over $63 billion, which is about $112 back for every dollar invested in GAO. The last 5 years, Frank, we've averaged around $60 billion a year in financial benefits. And a lot of the ways that the Congress has avoided sequestration for 14, 15, 16, and 17, if you recall, we had sequestration in 13, where the caps, they didn't meet the caps. But one of the reasons they've met them in 14 through 17 has been by implementing our recommendations. Effective functioning of government and protection of the public.
You almost have to wonder how much of the impact that adhering to IT recommendations, at least in that arena, has helped, because it sure does seem, as someone who covers this stuff, like there's a lot more IT reports coming out in the last couple of years, and a lot more times where, you know, GAO is getting called up to testify. Adhering to IT recommendations, at least in that arena, has helped, because it sure does seem, as someone who covers this stuff, like there's a lot more IT reports coming out in the last couple of years, and a lot more times where, you know, GAO is getting called up to testify before an engaged Congress with meaningful conversation and hauling the right people in to get some of these answers. And FITARA seems to have driven that as well. What can you say about the executive branch's execution of implementing FITARA from your perspective?
Yeah, I think just to pick a couple areas, the data center consolidation area continues to make some headway. So far, there's $2.8 billion that's been saved as a result of consolidating data centers. I'm very pleased with that. We see more progress in incremental development, where they're supposed to deliver functionality within a 12-month period of time. That was the hallmark many years ago of an agency IT acquisition, like tax system modernization, for example, or FAA modernization, that was on the high-risk list, was they were going for the big bang approach and a multi-year type of effort. But now there's more incremental development. We think that's good. There's been progress in the CIO responsibilities. You know, I was involved in the legislation that led to the Clinger-Cohen Act back in 1995-96 area, and that was intended to put in place not just CIOs, but strong CIOs, and that didn't happen. So I was glad to see FITARA come up to strengthen the CIO's roles, and there's still things that need to be done, you know, in that area, and to also, you know, focus on making sure overlapping and duplicative investments get attention as well. So I'm pleased with the progress, and I'm pleased with the bipartisan support of the Congress in this area, but there's still a ways to go. We're not you know, we're marching down the football field, if you pardon the football analogy, but we're a long way from the red zone. Okay.
Do you expect with the new administration, a lot of new moving parts coming in, that the momentum will kind of carry over?
I think it has to.
You guys are doing the best you can to continue that, it sounds like, from recommendations.
Right. No, exactly, Frank. In fact, I view part of our role in the transition area is to send a signal of not only what needs to be improved, but what needs to be continued. You know, there's a tendency of administrations, even some new ones of the same party, to want to throw everything out and start all over again. And I think it would be a big mistake, particularly in the IT acquisitions and operations area. So they need to continue to make these reforms, and that's one of the things that we've urged them to do in our materials that we put out. And I'll do that personally when I begin talking to people that are new people in OMB and other agencies across the federal government. But if you're going to modernize the federal government's operations, IT is so critical. I mean, it's just a core responsibility, and it's ubiquitous throughout the government's operations now. So if you're going to do anything successfully, you have to manage IT well.
So in addition to the high-risk list, I think there's something, too, that I thought would be interesting for our audience, and that one of the cool things you get to do is host these Comptroller General forums on specific issues that are important. You did one on IT earlier this year, I believe, maybe for the first time?
Yes.
With a collection of folks, including, I think, Richard McKinney and others, who kind of came in and shared a lot of their concerns, insights, et cetera. What can we expect? First off, is there going to be a formal report that comes out of that? And what were some of the things that were really brought
Yes.
up to your attention?
Yes, there'll be a formal report. It'll be out late next month or early February timeframes. We're very happy when we convene these forums. We get great participation from a lot of different experts. I just did one recently on problems with illicit drugs and how to deal with the drug problem in the country. We did one on retirement issues. There's big problems with our retirement system in the country, all components of it, private sector and public sector involvement. And the one on IT was equally well attended, and we got a lot of good information out of it. And the report will be structured around different categories where we have the collective advice. Typically, when you get together all these experts from different areas, number one, they don't usually meet all together. Number two, you get a lot of synergy out of the discussion, and you find quickly you can get about 80% agreement on what really needs to be done in some of these areas. And so the areas we'll touch on will be, budget formulation area, governance, CIO responsibilities. We're gonna distill their advice on transition planning for the new administration, and talk about workforce issues. I think the workforce issues are absolutely critical, and I was pleased to see the Congress gave additional authorities. And the Congress has acted a lot on these high-risk areas, which I think is very important. There's a number of bills they've passed in cybersecurity, probably five bills between 2015 and 2017. They've just passed the Toxic Controlled Substance Act to deal with one of the other areas on the high-risk list is assessing and controlling toxic chemicals in the country. They've passed legislation in the past on oversight of medical products and safety in the pharmaceutical area. So they've really, in a number of areas, there's legislation being crafted, but it hasn't passed yet, and I'm hopeful in the future will be. Postal service reform is one area.
I always love talking with you, Gene, because you learn about all the stuff the government's not doing as well as it could.
Yeah.
Where else we're going to get talk on illicit drug use and toxic chemicals and stuff at an IT event? I love it.
Well, I'm talking about stopping illicit drug use, Frank.
Starting with me.
I'm going to be careful. All right.
One more thing before we get to some audience Q&A to wrap up. Talk about the Data Act. There was a hearing, I think, just last week, or if not, it was the week prior. Probably most of you are familiar with that, but requiring 24 agencies to upload their spending data, and I think there's a deadline of May 2017.
That's correct.
So where are we at with that, and what concerns do you guys have right now with that implementation?
Yeah, this is a very important piece of legislation to be, if effectively implemented, it will have a transformative effect on the transparency and the accountability of federal government spending. I firmly and strongly supported the passage of the legislation. Even though we're not required to, we've been doing reports from day one to encourage effective implementation. I don't want to wait and come in later and find that the groundwork hadn't been laid properly. So the data standards have been issued. The agencies have been preparing their plans. We think things have progressed well, but we're concerned some agencies may not be fully ready to report in the May 2017 timeframe. There's still some guidance issues. There's issues, and there's an IT heavy component to this, to integrating some of the financial management systems with other systems, because the Act calls for reporting on more things than USA spending has contemplated before. And so it expands the number of things that need to be reported, and it tracks the spending from the allocation to the obligation to the eventual expenditure. So it's supposed to be a real-time database where people can do things. I don't think also there's been enough attention to the governance structure I was very concerned. This is one area where I was concerned that the transition to a new administration might slow down the implementation of this act by the setting of other priorities. So I'm going to be carefully watching that and making recommendations to make sure that that doesn't happen, because the actual, as you point out, the implementation date is right at the beginning of a new administration. So it straddles both administrations. Also, the one area that really hasn't been addressed, that was supposed to be addressed through the Government Performance and Results Act, but OMB deferred it until the DATE Act implementation, that is to have a complete inventory of federal programs. We do not yet have at the federal government level a complete inventory of federal programs. So all the spending is supposed to be attached to individual programs across the federal government. So that needs to still be done. And so there's some incomplete aspects to this. Agencies, I think OMB and Treasury have done a credible job preparing. The agencies are preparing, but it is a more of a heavy lift for some agencies than for others. And so I expect implementation to proceed, but to be uneven.
Do we, I have a couple more questions as well, but does anyone in the audience have a question for Gene here? If no one, oh, we got one right there. 1 second.
Good morning. You mentioned the benefits of integrated financial reporting through consolidated financial systems. That's great. Do you think that FTARA will have a role in helping helping departments with many legacy agencies and many legacy systems? That is a problem I've observed at DHS, and I'm sure other departments have it as well. Do you think FTARA, the reporting requirements of FTARA, will help at least bring those problems to the surface for addressed by the new administration, perhaps? Is that a possibility?
Yes, definitely, and it should. I mean, I think there needs to be a very good relationship between the CIOs and the CFOs across the federal government. I've always supported that. It hasn't been there in a lot of cases. And you see as many failures. If you look at the list of IT failures that we've have chronicled over time in our reports, you'll find in there many financial management systems that failed and were completely shut down, including one in the Department of Homeland Security, early on. And so that is definitely should be done, and there should be more integration, and the FTARA reporting should surface IT, high-risk IT projects in the financial management or in the integration area as well. So I'm hopeful that the combination of these efforts will produce positive change that should have been done all the time. I mean, the federal government's filled with silos, across agencies, within agencies, and IT is really the solution to trying to shed more light and visibility on these interrelationships and the integration that should take place over time. Most of the high-risk areas that we've added over these past several years involve, many of them involve multiple agencies, and you need to have more cooperation among federal agencies to tackle difficult issues. And so, yes, bottom line answer is yes.
Any other questions there? I want to close out by just saying that sort of regardless of what happens with the next administration, this Congress isn't going to change that much. And a lot of the folks you've mentioned already, Connolly, Meadows, et cetera, are coming back. So it sounds like we can expect more oversight from Congress regardless of what recommendations, what is executed by the new executive branch coming in. And continued oversight on your side as well, right? I mean,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right, Frank. I mean, there is some stability in the Congress, and we'll be working with them. A lot of these laws, and the reason I've always supported having legislation to underpin management reforms is so that they do transcend administrations, that they do provide enough continuity over time to be effective. And with FTARA being a legislative vehicle, with the DATE Act being a legislative vehicle, these are the laws of the land, and they're required to implement these things. And I think, Congress has, focused. The high-risk program actually, in my opinion, is one of the longest running good government bipartisan efforts that in our federal government's history. It's been in place since 1990. I'm hoping the new administration embraces it, as prior administrations have, as part of their management agenda for making reform cases, and it's very significant also to dealing with some of the federal government's fiscal challenges as well. I mean, you have to have better information to manage more effectively if you're going to save money and to operate very efficiently and effectively. And I think, you know, the incoming administration will have a lot of people coming from the business community who are used to having good, audited, reliable, timely financial information to make business decisions. I think they'll be, in some cases, disappointed when they land in their new positions that they don't have that same quality financial information at their fingertips that they're used to. And, but it can be done, and it needs to be done. And that's certainly what we've advocated over the years.
Sounds like better IT or bust, regardless of what happens with the transition. So I want to thank Gene for being here, taking time out of your busy schedule. Thanks to our underwriters, Dell EMC, and all the folks that came, and our speakers as well. And you guys have a good rest of your afternoons. Take care, everybody.